MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, always having a good time talking college football, but especially had a good time putting this one together. We're always talking about the top teams, but what about the bottom of the barrel in college football? Well, after 3 weeks of the season, I thought I would put together my first ever bottom 10 rankings. And I came up with too many teams. I've got a bottom 11, so I squeezed them into 10 spots. We've got a tie at number 3. So listen up. Then, of course, we invite you to like and subscribe, but also comment with maybe something we missed, or maybe you've got an interesting angle on this bottom 10. At number 10, we've got a team at SMU that's 0-3. The disclaimer here is that they played some pretty good competition the last 2 weeks, losing to TCU and Michigan and playing pretty darn respectable football in the first half of those 2 games. So SMU, 0-3, winless, first year under Sonny Dykes, just barely makes it into the bottom 10 at 0-3. At number 9, I think this is a little bit more embarrassing. Arkansas is 1-2, so they've won. But out of the mighty SEC, they went to Fort Collins and lost as a double-digit favorite to Colorado State. Then they came home last weekend, and as a 7-point favorite, they lost to the Mean Green of North Texas, not by a little, but by a lot, 44-17, blown off the field as a 7-point favorite at home to a Group of 5 team. And in addition to that, what topped it off was that they made all the highlights for this really stupid play, getting completely duped by the North Texas punt returner. If you didn't see it, you got to look it up. He fakes the fair catch. He zips down the sideline for a touchdown. North Texas beats Arkansas 44-17. Welcome to the bottom 10, Chad Morris in Arkansas. At number 8, we've got New Mexico State. They actually have one more loss than everybody else could possibly have in the country because they played way back in week 0, so they're already 0-4, and they've been outscored by 124 points. New Mexico State 0-4, they're at number 8. At number 7, this team was supposed to challenge by many people's prognostications in the Pac-12 South. Not me, but Arizona's 1-2. And forget that they just blasted poor Southern Utah 63-31. The 2 games before that, atrocious. They lost to BYU at home, and then they went on the road to Houston, and forget the final score. They were down 38-0 in the third quarter before they scored any points, and any points that they did score were meaningless. Match up the Heisman Trophy, one of the favorites, Khalil Tate, and an offensive guru in Kevin Sumlin, and it seemed to be a perfect marriage, and it's been anything but. Arizona has looked awful against anybody with a pulse. They are 1-2 on the season. And if you check out Khalil Tate's rushing numbers in its last 5 Arizona appearances against legitimate foes, meaning high group of 5s like Houston or Power 5s, the last 3 games of last season, the 2 games against Houston and BYU this year, his running stats are basically null and void. Arizona, number 7 in our bottom 10. All right, at number 6, we go with a collection from Conference USA. The bottom 4 teams in Conference USA are 0-12 collectively. They are Western Kentucky, Old Dominion, Texas San Antonio, and UTEP. They are 0-12, and they've been outscored 426 to 181. Now they have played 6 of those 12 games against some pretty good competition in Wisconsin, Louisville, Arizona State, Tennessee, Kansas State, and Baylor. So we'll cut them some slack, but still, 0-12, they are number 6. All right, to our top 5 of the bottom 5, if that makes sense. North Carolina's at number 5, and this has been going on now for a couple years in Chapel Hill. North Carolina was awful last season at 3-9, 1-8 in the ACC, and they are even worse this season. Larry Fedora, are you going to have a job in December at North Carolina? The Tar Heels were lucky. They can thank Florence for wiping out their game against UCF, or they'd be 0-3, but they're only 0-2 right now. And one of those losses was to East Carolina by 22 points. They lost to East Carolina 41-19. East Carolina lost to North Carolina A&T. North Carolina A&T beat East Carolina. East Carolina beat North Carolina by 22 points. That's how bad the Heels are at 0-2. And number 5 in our bottom 10. At number 4, Scott Frost, we expected so much more out of you, and maybe we'll get it at some point. But right now, Nebraska has lost 2 games, and they've lost their starting quarterback in Adrian Martinez. They lost to Colorado in a well-played game in Lincoln, 33-28. But then this debacle on Saturday against Troy as an 11-point favorite. They lost to Troy 24-19. Scott Frost, the magic is probably the slow-working kind, so we will cut you some slack. But for right now, you are at number 4 in our bottom 10. All right, we've got a tie at number 3 because I weighed the ineptness of Rutgers, but that's expected, versus the complete ineptness of Florida State, which is not expected. So Florida State's 1-2, Rutgers is 1-2. Florida State, wow, they got buried by Virginia Tech at home on opening night, scoring all but 3 points. Then they played Samford, and they escaped with a narrow win. They got outplayed by Samford at home. They trailed in that game 23-14. And then the topper, going to Syracuse against a team that is expected to be the worst team in the division and possibly the worst team in the ACC this year, and they get blasted 30-7. They didn't score any meaningful points. By the time they put a touchdown on the board, they were down 23-7 in this game. So basically, Florida State blasted 57-10 by 2 Power 5 opponents in their own conference, 0-2 in the ACC, having scored no meaningful touchdowns on the season. Willie Taggart is supposed to have an offensive mind, and this is Florida State football right now. It is deplorable. Now look at Florida State and the way they're playing. Look at the rest of their schedule. Ranked number 1 by MarkRogersTV in the preseason. It's tough to find some wins for Florida State unless they somehow pull together that talent. Well, who could be as bad as Florida State? How about Rutgers? Okay, we expect this of Rutgers, but at 1-2, Rutgers, did you see this score from over the weekend? The Scarlet Knights didn't just lose to Kansas. Kansas, where is Kansas on the bottom 10? Kansas has to be on the bottom 10. Kansas has made the bottom 10. They are the bottom 10. No more. Jayhawks on a 2-game winning streak blasted one of the Michigan directional schools 2 weeks ago, and then they annihilated Rutgers 55-14. Kansas scored 3 more points against Rutgers than Ohio State did. Rutgers, as a 2.5-point underdog, went to Lawrence, Kansas, and came home beaten down by 41 points to Kansas. So at a tie for number 3 in my bottom 10 is Florida State with the lofty expectations at 1-2, and Rutgers with the low expectations at 1-2, but having lost to Kansas by 41 points. All right. At number 2, Willie Taggart, Scott Frost, meet Chip Kelly. UCLA's 0-3 for the first time since 1971, and the guy on the sideline is being paid a ton of money to win football games, and most likely he's going to get that accomplished at some point. And so UCLA fans are hoping and expecting, for all that money and all that cachet that Chip Kelly has brought to Westwood, that they're going to find themselves in the top 10, not the bottom 10. But for right now, it's the bottom 10. UCLA's not just 0-3, they're 0-2 against the group of 5, and they lost both of those games by multiple scores. They haven't even played anyone within 1 score. They lost to Cincinnati at home 26-17. They lost to Fresno State over the weekend at home 38-14. Yes, 0-3 for UCLA for the first time since 1971. The Bruins are number 2 in my bottom 10. And now at number 1, many called it the best conference in college football entering 2018. I call it the number 1 selection in my bottom 10, and it's the Big Ten. The Big Ten on Saturday had the distinction of having 4 teams, double-digit favorites, all lose, and all lose to non-Power 5 conference teams. Let that sink in. 4 double-digit favorites, all lose, and yes, I believe they all lost at home. And they lost to Group of 5, and we'll put BYU somewhere in there. Wisconsin loses as the number 6 team in the country at home to BYU as a 23-point favorite. Nebraska, we already talked about it. They lost to Troy as an 11-point favorite. Northwestern blew a 21-3 lead, gave up 2 pick sixes, and let Akron, the Zips, win in Evanston. Northwestern, a team that's finished in the top 15 in the country with 10-win seasons 2 of the last 3 years, lost to Akron. And Maryland, a lot of Big Ten fans don't want to take on Maryland or Rutgers as true Big Ten teams, but you know what? They're in the rankings, they're in the standings in the Big Ten, so you've got to put up with the Maryland follies as well. 2 weeks after defeating Texas, they, as a 15-point favorite, lost to Temple, and they just didn't lose the game in the final seconds. They lost to Temple 35-14. Temple lost to Villanova. The Big Ten was saved by Ohio State, who, once again, looks like they're going to carry the banner, or at least the Ohio State-Penn State winner, most likely, going to carry the banner for the Big Ten, which got roughed up over the weekend with 4 big favorites going down and going down hard. That's my bottom 10. We got SMU at number 10, Arkansas at 9, New Mexico State at 8, Arizona at 7. Number 6 is Conference USA's bottom 4 teams. Number 5 is North Carolina. Number 4, Nebraska. Couldn't make up my mind. Number 3 is a tie between Florida State and Rutgers. At number 2, Chip Kelly and UCLA. And the bottom entry in the bottom 10, or the number 1 entry, however you look at it, goes to the Big Ten with 4 big downers on Saturday. Ohio State saved them, but still couldn't save the Big Ten from the bottom 10. Right here on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.